Morning everyone and welcome to the Fife Property Show. Great topic this morning to discuss, and it's becoming an accidental landlord and all you need to know to make it a success. To help me discuss this morning I have investor and landlord Jim Parker. Morning Jim.
Hi Richard, how are you?
I'm really good this morning, how are you?
Fantastic, I've just been out for a wee walk. It's absolutely beautiful out there.
It is really nice today. And also we have letting agent Karen Marshall this morning. Morning Karen. How are you today, Karen?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, really well. So yeah, today's topic is becoming an accidental landlord and how to make it a success. So I'll just go in and I'll introduce the subject this morning. So not everyone sets out to be a landlord, and becoming an accidental one is more common than you think. An accidental landlord is someone who becomes a landlord by circumstances rather than by plan. And it can happen for several reasons. You could be relocating for work, moving in with your partner, or having trouble finding a buyer on your current home, or you might have inherited the property. That's a really common one. Being a landlord can provide you with an unexpected passive income, but there's a lot to know before you get started. Lettings legislation is complex, forever changing, and comes with plenty of responsibilities. So it pays to be informed to make your transition from property owner to landlord as smooth as possible. So yeah, an accidental landlord, and I think there's a lot of common ones there that we see quite a lot, obviously inheriting a property and people relocating for work and things as well, and then choosing to let the property out. Karen, do you see a lot of that, obviously working within lettings and things?
Yep, we've got a lot of it. So like you say, it comes in all different forms in the way that they've ended up with the property, but they all seem to have the same sort of attachment to it. So it's trying to obviously walk them through the different stages and adapting from owning that property to becoming.
Yeah. Jim?
Accidental landlord. Sometimes it's a blessing in disguise. I don't think people realise how fortunate they are in some occasions to be that accidental landlord.
Yeah.
Because if the numbers stack up, it then begins, and the penny begins to drop. It's like, wait a minute, I should have been doing this years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of people find that obviously it's something they've never maybe considered or thought about, and then lo and behold, they end up being a landlord of a property and then see how lucrative it could be.
I don't think they realise, though, as well as the amount of legislation they've got to comply with.
Yeah, I think, and that's a big thing, yeah, that people don't expect, and it pays to obviously be informed about that, I think.
And even dare I say, some of the letting agents don't understand the legislation to comply with.
Well,
I mean, look at that. I mean, let's talk about a case in point. I've just bought 2 properties managed by another letting agent in Cooper. I'm not going to say who they are. And we've got to do the EICR because it does not exist and yet it's been tenanted before. And we've got to do the gas certificate because they're out of date. And then we've got to do what else? The smoke detectors and the heat detectors. This letting agent had no idea what they were doing. And they've been around for 30 years.
I think we have to do everything for those ones, and scarily enough, there's a tenant in one of them. So,
God forbid, I'll tell you what happens with that, and I'll get on my high horse with this, is you as a landlord or an investor, the letting agent, nothing happens to the letting agent. If anything happens to the tenant, you're the one liable for it. If the tenant dies because the gas certificate isn't in place or the smoke detector wasn't done properly, or the heat detector wasn't done properly, you're going to jail. Corporate manslaughter.
Yeah, as
a cheery start to the day.
But the penalties around obviously not complying with the legislation can be quite hefty, and obviously depending on what the outcome is. But it pays to have obviously a letting agent who is knowledgeable and does things obviously correctly. But you have to have a lot of trust in your letting agent that they are doing what they're supposed to be doing, because like you say, inevitably it falls back to you as the landlord and the property owner. So that's really important. And I think obviously becoming an accidental landlord, you need to then obviously consider about how you're going to manage and look after the property. And this brings us on to our first topic, which is finding and managing tenants. Now, generally speaking, landlords divide into 2 camps. Those who choose to self-manage once letting agents have been found, once letting agents have found a tenant, and those who ask a managing agent to take care of everything. The question ultimately comes down to whether you wish to be an active landlord or with a passive income. To help you decide which option is right, here's a quick rundown of what's involved. Now, finding a tenant entails advertising your property, vetting inquiries for their suitability, attending viewings, negotiating offers, and referencing prospective candidates. Creating a tenancy means getting your property professionally cleaned, preparing a tenancy agreement, collecting the first month's rent and security deposit, drawing up detailed inventory, and then meeting the tenants to sign off on the paperwork and hand over the keys. Now, that's a very brief rundown of what actually is involved, but I think they are the main points.
Who wants to be an active landlord?
Yeah, there is so much more involved in it, and we know that firsthand. Karen, you'll know that because you set up a lot of the tenancies for our lettings division. So
there's a lot of work involved. Obviously, you've got it in a nutshell, but yeah, there's a lot more that goes into it, and there's going to be unexpected things that pop up. So the amount of time that it can take just to get things sorted for your property for a move-in is very time-consuming.
Yeah, I think, and that's just the initial, obviously, advertising and referencing and finding the tenant. I think once we done training, Karen, and we done a list, and we were asked to write down everything that we do in that process, and I think we're 100 and odd points, and we were still more to add to that. So that was a good exercise to actually demonstrate how much goes into that process. And then obviously ongoing management includes organising gas and electrical safety checks, dealing with maintenance, repairs and emergencies, carrying out inspections during the tenancy, staying on top of lettings legislation, ensuring payment of rent, handling any issues that may arise with your tenants or their neighbours, meeting with the tenants to collect the keys when they move out, and finally checking your property against the inventory to agree on any deductions from the security deposit. If you live near a rental property and have the time and inclination to deal with all the above, being a self-managed landlord could be for you. If you live further away or you're busy enough already, it can prove impractical to manage everything yourself. I think that's the two sides to look at it. I mean, if you do have property and maybe you already are retired and you want to actually maybe do the whole management process, then that's fine, but you need to obviously be in the know. I think if you're an investor and looking to build a portfolio and things, you need to have a letting agent on site who's going to do all that for you and take all the worry of trying to keep up with legislation and using your own time to constantly manage the property. It is quite time consuming and takes up a lot of our time managing properties, but that's what we're here for. Would you agree with that, Jim?
It's interesting that you said you're retired to look after your own properties, and I'm like, okay, so
no, it was an example, but
so no, this is. But we had it the other day. Mind, I had an investor. I was doing a private session with an investor, a couple, and when you hit the nail on the head. When you retire from your job, woohoo!
Yeah.
To get another job.
You get another job, yeah.
What's the mentality in that? It's like you retire from your job to have an easy life and to relax and take account of the rewards that you've actually accumulated over the years in order to enjoy them, to benefit from them. And lo and behold, you go out and you get another job. And it's like, just stay in your existing job and then just pay a letting agent, if that's the case, to go and do that for you. Because I tell you what, it's your own job that you've just retired from is probably a hell of a lot easier than becoming a self-managed landlord. Self-managed landlord is not for the faint-hearted. I can guarantee that. I have done both. And I tell you what, being a hands-off, passive income landlord investor is the best way to go. But you have to have a good team on side in order to understand the legislation, know the process, and know exactly what they need to do, when they need to do it, and how they need to do it in order to get the right result in the most efficient time and to maximise the return on your capital. That's really what it comes down to. That's it in a nutshell. We could almost end the show there. That's like a final thought. But definitely, you know, I'd taken some notes on that, and I thought, you know, self-managing and having a letting agent is completely different kettle of fish. The self-managed route, doing it yourself and all the rest of it, you've got to learn a raft of legislation. Yeah, you know, at some point in time in the future, we're going to have accredited landlords. They're going to be forced down the track by the Scottish Government to actually be accredited and have some sort of qualification to ensure that they're actually looking after their property. It's an amazing amount of landlords I go round, and I just look, and they've been doing it for years, and I just have a look around their properties when they're either selling or they're thinking about letting through us, or they're thinking about offloading an off-market deal with me. And I look round and I think, geez, you've no done this and you've no done that, and where's your EICR, and where's your gas certificate, where's your Legionella test certificate, Where, you know, and all these different things they don't account of. I mean, it's amazing the amount of landlords that are still in the dark ages with the smoke detectors. It's like, oh, well, I've got one upstairs and I've got one downstairs.
Yeah.
Right, okay, what about every single reception room? What about the heat detector in your kitchen? You know, are they all interlinked? Is there one of them hardwired? Because you can't just have them all, Barry. One of them has to be hardwired. So it's a raft of different things you've got to learn. And being an accidental landlord can actually pay dividends. But if you go and try and self-manage it yourself, being an accidental landlord, you're on a hiding to nothing. You should really be getting a proper professional letting agent to do it for you.
Yeah, I think that obviously the basic fundamentals of obviously the legislation and keeping property compliant, and to us obviously as letting agents, Karen, you'll obviously appreciate this because you deal with it on a daily basis, and we've trained in it all, and it's second nature to us that obviously we know where smoke alarms, where they're meant to be, how long their lifespan is, and what an EICR is, and when it needs to be renewed, and these are all just things that we know off the cuff, but to accidental landlords, it will be completely new and absolutely foreign to them.
Well, it's a classic example that you're paid to do it. I mean, it's your job day in, day out. You know, that's the nuts and bolts of it. I always say, never argue with somebody that's paid to do that job, because I'll tell you what, if you're doing it voluntarily, this is in terms of disputes and stuff, it's like they've got a full-time job. You're keeping them in a job. They're getting paid for it while you're arguing about it, and it's a completely voluntary, unpaid position for you. And all the life is sucked out of you at the same time, and then you're not getting. So, hey, for the price of a cup of coffee every single day, I would rather have a letting agent do it for me. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, Karen, do you experience obviously the feedback for people maybe who are accidental or new landlords, and when you're advising them of what needs to be in place, that how maybe uneducated they are to the fact?
Yeah, I think it can be quite overwhelming. Obviously, like you're saying, there's a lot of like safety regulations going along with it. Even the leases, they've obviously changed in the last few years. So we have like landlords that are like, even we've got new ones that come up and they're like, oh, are the leases still have fixed terms? It's like, no, they haven't for a few years now. So it's all these little bits and pieces that they don't know. And obviously we take it for granted because we've been doing it for so long and we do know all of this. And even like regulations with regards to smoke alarms, they seem to be changing quite a lot as well. So it's hard to, if you are an accidental landlord that's not doing this full time, it's hard to kind of keep up and know that you're doing the right things. And like Jim says, even you've got letting agents, that should have been a case of just taking on a property that had everything in place for it. All we should have had to do was get an inventory when the tenant was going to be moving into the new one. But it wasn't. We're now having to get EICR, gas there, everything to be able to rent it out, when the reality is if you had somebody properly looking after it, that should have all been in place.
It's interesting that you talk about the rent collection as well, because it says on there, you know, in terms of the rent collection and making sure it's all collected. I mean, look at the case in point this week. You know, we had 3 cases of outstanding rent, and within 15 minutes it was resolved.
Yeah,
thousands coming in, and I'll bet you a pound to a penny, no one else would be able to do that. Because they don't understand the systems and how they work and how they operate in order to jump through all these hoops, in order to tick all the boxes to make sure they're all paid exactly when they're meant to be paid. And that's the expertise that a letting agent gives you. I'm not going to say let's be honest, I'm not going to say every letting agent gives you that, because I've yet to come across a better letting agent than me. Let's be honest, you know, I'm just going to put that out there. If you're a letting agent and you want to challenge me, then by all means challenge me to be the #1 letting agent in Scotland or Britain or whatever it is, and I'll beat you.
Well, I think as well, if you're not used to being a landlord and trying to deal with that side of the rent collection as well, it can be an awkward conversation to have to go to somebody and be like, oh, paid your rent, what's going on? So if you've got somebody to kind of take that stress off of you and you know they're sorting it as well, it just takes that, it gives you a wee bit more kind of peace of mind rather than having to go and knock on somebody's door, oh, you've not paid your rent.
Yeah, I think obviously keeping on top of obviously rental payments, and that can be an awkward conversation if you don't know how to approach it properly, or you don't know the right avenues to try and resolve it. I think they all go hand in hand with obviously managing the property correctly. And
here's an easy top tip for somebody that's watching just now. It's maybe self-managing themselves. They're struggling to collect their rent. Just knock on the tenant's door and say, I'm not really sure, but did you realise that your rent's not getting paid anymore? Yeah. Or you're standing over, or you're standing over, standing orders not coming into our bank anymore. Now, I'll tell you 99 times out of 100, even though they realise that, they'll actually say, oh, I didn't realise. So what are we going to do about it to resolve it? And then it opens it up really easy straight away, because it's non-confrontational. You're not backing somebody into a corner, and so they're not coming out fighting. So there's a top tip straight away in order to get your rent back on track, or the first steps in order to do that.
Yeah, good point, and a good, obviously, action to take if things are in that situation. It's just to open that conversation with the tenant and take it to there. So obviously, accidental landlords look at the options of finding and managing tenants and using agents, and then obviously, of course, preparing your property, which is the next topic. Now, as a legal requirement, you need to comply with gas, electricity, and fire safety regulations by obtaining certificates and installing smoke alarms. But a successful rental property is also one that's easy and enjoyable to live in. If you've lived in the home for a long time, you're probably used to its quirks, and you might not have remedied minor repairs. We're all busy, and it's easy to forget non-urgent tasks with 1,000 other things to do. For an inherited property, you may need to bring it up to date with modern standards and expectations. And if you've never lived there, you're less likely to be fully aware of ongoing problems, overdue maintenance, and outstanding repairs. When a tenant moves in, they'll experience all the goods and all the bads in a very short space of time. This might prove overwhelming and upsetting for them while giving you a long and urgent to-do list. Little things like leaky taps, wobbly handles, cupboards and doors that don't close, or anything that requires a knack to function will almost certainly come back to haunt you. Fix them now and avoid them becoming a source of unnecessary friction. Now that's we see things like that quite a lot. Could occur, Karen. I can see you smiling because obviously you've dealt with a lot of that. So I'll let you give me your input on what you think about obviously that in preparation of properties.
Yeah, I think obviously if you're not living in a property all the time, you're not going to pick up on like the little niggles, like you say. And when a new tenant goes in, you find that you get little teething issues from it. So I think it's just addressing them at the start of the tenancy and making good of them. And then you're getting your tenancy back on like a good term. Obviously, there's going to be little bits and pieces, but it's obviously addressing it in the best way so you keep your tenant happy and you've got a property that's kept in like a good condition as well.
Yeah, I think a good point in that as well, and I think it really does factor in with accidental landlords. Like maybe if people are living in the property and they move for work and they go to let the property out, I mean things like just obviously kitchen cupboards maybe not shutting properly, and things that you've become accustomed to while you live there, and they're fine with you because you're like, oh, you just lift that up and lift that cupboard door up and push it in to shut it, and it's like, but if a tenant comes in, that's not acceptable to them. I mean, they're paying rent, they want the cupboard door just to shut properly, just for example. So all these wee things that maybe if you're living in a property and are fine to you, you really need to address them. And that's why it's good to have an agent come in and obviously look around the property and give you a view of what the property is from their perspective, and like, you need to do this, this, and this to make the property good. Jim, I'm sure you've experienced things like that over the years.
Classic one is, I'll tell you what, I'll just leave my furniture and it's really nice. It's a bra suite. Has it got the fire tickets on it? Oh, well, I cut them off because they were hanging out. It's like you've had it. You can't leave it. Yeah. So as soon as you cut the labels off, your suite's nil and invalid. And the headboards as well. You know, if you've got foam-based headboards and they've got fire certificates, fire tickets on them, and you actually take them off and cut them off as well, it's invalid. You can't leave them. So it's these minor things that you've inherited from being an accidental landlord that you don't realise that you're actually passing on to someone else, and they are non-compliant with existing legislation. And you know, you're right, and we come back to saying preparing your property. It's I always keep saying, and I beat the drum, is would you live in it yourself? And if you wouldn't live in it yourself, then you shouldn't be renting it to anybody else. That's the reality. So you've got to put it in a fit state about, you know, how you would want it yourself in order to rent it to someone else. Now, I'm not talking about putting a German style, a top of the range kitchen in, and you know, and your porcelanosa and tiles and bathroom suites and all the rest of it. I'm talking about, you know, mid range kitchens, good standard Howdens, 18 mil carcass kitchens, ready built, just slot in, nice quality worktop, stainless steel oven, hob and extractor. These sort of things that just make it a lot better for somebody to want to live in it. And if you're inheriting a property, then you might have to make these upgrades in order to rent it. You have a lot of people that inherit the property, or they have to look after the property because the person in there has to go into care. So they become an accidental landlord to protect the asset, because what happens is on occasions you can rent it, and then the rental amount will go towards the care costs, and it keeps a hold of the asset just now. However, on occasions they'll force you to sell the asset for the care costs. But I don't know the ins and outs of it completely legally. Maybe some lawyer could pick up on that if they're listening to this and give us a wee bit of advice on it, or for anyone else. But you should really consult a professional lawyer for it. But that often happens where you do get people approaching us. They're going to rent it because they want to protect the asset. I mean, and quite rightly so. Let's be honest. It's like, these people have worked all their life to accumulate this wealth through they can pass it on to their family, while somebody else is just basically giving it all away. I don't want to say the word, lived the life of Riley and never had a care in the world, and they're sitting across the table from them getting the same amount of money paid for them by the government. It's just no right. It just doesn't sit right with me morally, and the fact that they're supposed to be passing it on to their family and their next generation in order to help them, and as a result it just gets souped up into the ether by the government.
Yeah, I mean, we see that happening quite a lot, and I do agree with that statement, Jim.
I'll need you a soapbox to stand on the day.
I know. No, you made a good point, and I do agree with that, and I'm sure many will as well. And we have seen that happen quite a lot throughout the years. It's happened for a long time to people, and it is a shame, but unfortunately, it is the way it is.
The key to that is lifetime tenancies.
Yeah.
You need to speak to a solicitor about that, but the reality is, if you're getting to that age, then maybe you should give the asset to your kids straight away, and then you have a lifetime tenancy in the actual property until you pass away, and then the asset's theirs because they own it. But it keeps your legal rights. Again, speak to a solicitor about this, but keeps you in a place where you're legally entitled to live in that place till you pass on. Yeah,
that's a good point. Some good advice. I think, as you mentioned here about obviously inheriting property, and obviously if you're inheriting the property or you're taking over the property while somebody maybe is in care, then the property is more than likely going to be dated and need to be upgraded. But I think upgrades, you need to be careful on the standard. I mean, you don't even have to be doing these, like you say, these high spec finishes, as long as they're good quality finishes. And then it says obviously in here, for larger expenses like upgrading fittings and appliances, talk to us first and we'll help you budget correctly and optimize your rent income by increasing exactly the sort of home that tenants want to rent. So
that's the classic about, they often get, I've often been renting people's houses, and they've been talking about upgrading the kitchen, and they've been given quotes, and Wren Kitchens has been out, let's name a name here, and the quote is £15,000, and I'm like, what?
Yes.
And the gold plate in the worktops. It's like £15,000 for a kitchen at £5,000 top of the range, as far as I'm concerned. In terms of that, unless you're gold plating or putting marble or granite worktops on or whatever, it's like £15,000 for a kitchen is no compass mentis, really. I mean, you've got, unless it's for you to stay in permanently, but no for things like that. There's just no return in that. £15,000 could give you a deposit on a 1-bedroom flat, on a buy-to-let property. Never mind buying a kitchen, which will earn a hell of a lot more money than buying a kitchen will.
I know, and to be honest, I've seen a lot of Wren kitchens being installed and things, and quality is not that astonishingly great, to be honest, but you could get probably just as good for a fraction of the price. Like you say, Jim, Howdens is quite a good one.
They're all good, Richard. It's just that some of them, Wren's good quality, Howdens is good quality, is good quality, Magnet's good quality. They're all good quality kitchens at a certain price range. That's the key here. Often what happens is a salesman walks in from that area, and they're commission based, so they see a golden opportunity, if you're given the right signals, to charge you an extortionate amount more than what the actual kitchen is. I get it at Howden's.
Yeah.
It's like price of the month. They just make it up as they go along. And I look at my previous one, and I look at my previous invoice, and it's like, well, I got that carcass for 80 quid last month. On this one that you're quoting me for this kitchen, the same carcass is £200. That can't be right. And okay, we'll just adjust it then. Right, all right, okay, just like that.
Yeah,
so
and
you have to be careful and you have to watch.
Yeah, I think, and obviously, like Jim, you do a lot like refurbs and things often, so maybe you're obviously aware of these changes in prices, but people that aren't, then they're just going to accept it and think, well, that's the price. But obviously, you're seeing the difference in that in shorter periods of time, which again, obviously, pays dividends to come to somebody who's in the know and obviously experience and can advise you properly about pricing structures for things and not overpaying for certain fixtures and fittings.
Well, that's where your money's made, isn't it? You could end up, I mean, where again, I come back to when I walk around some properties and I'm taking viewers around the property, you get astronomical figures thrown at you. It's going to cost me £50,000 or a fortune to upgrade this property. But then when you come back to saying, well, how much does that £50,000 break down to? Let's walk through it. Okay, how much is your windows? Well, then it's going to be that. No, well, your windows is that. It's half that price. Okay, so what have you got for your kitchen? Oh, well, I've got that. No, your kitchen is that, because I've got the same kitchen somewhere else and I've installed it with this size of property. And then what about your bathroom? And by the time we've finished the conversation, the budget they had is my budget's half of theirs. And then they see sense and they go, oh, you're absolutely right. I says, but I tell you what, if you want me to charge you 50 grand, I'll go and fit everything for you.
Yeah.
Because I'm happy to make the money. And they understand and they get the point straight away. And the fact that, you have to be careful, because that's where you start losing your margins, because then you're investing a lot more capital into the project and you're not able to release it again, because you'll not get a favourable valuation if you're putting that amount of money into a property. Yeah. You have to be pretty savvy in what you're doing in order to get the maximum out, so you've got the least money in to make the highest return on that investment.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think the takeaway for that there is to obviously be very vigilant with your spending and budgeting when doing any renovations or upgrades to the property. Okay, and then that brings us on to the next topic, which is mortgage and tax. Now, lending policies vary widely. Jim, you buy-to-let mortgages is your forte, so you'll be interested in this section. So if you have a mortgage on your existing home, you'll need to inform your lender that you intend to rent it out. Now, depending on the terms and conditions of your loan, you may be allowed to stay on the same agreement, or they may switch you to a more expensive buy-to-let rate. Before you commit to anything, explore other lenders and see whether you can remortgage with them on a more flexible terms. Talk to a financial advisor with experience in residential and buy-to-let mortgages to understand every option open to you. Rates and products are changing all the time, and you may even find a more competitive deal than your current one. The rent received from your property is taxable, but there are various costs you can claim back. In general maintenance, repairs and management are allowable expenses, but improvements are not. So yeah, and an example of that there, it says is obviously if an oven breaks down and you need to replace it, you can take the cost off your income, but if you decide to upgrade the kitchen, that's not an allowable expense. That says you're undoubtedly increase the rent you achieve by keeping your property up to scratch and ahead of competition. So I think, yeah, so obviously mortgage rates and things, obviously you need to seek the proper advice when you're doing that to see if you are getting obviously the best rate that's out there. I think speaking to the people that know that, obviously whether that be your mortgage broker or obviously an agent who has experience in obviously the buy-to-let market, like obviously ourselves, is very important to do that. I mean, Jim, you do a lot of buy-to-let deals.
Yeah, you got to be very wary. Probably a classic now is with the bank, and I'm not going to say which bank it is. No. But one person came to me about commercial loans, and she says to me, and I says, well, what's the going rate? And she went, well, we could do this at a loan value of 60%, and we could charge 4.5% above base. And I went, what? 4.5% above base? You're having a laugh. I actually said that to her, by the way. Says, you're having a laugh. And then all of a sudden I got switched to someone else who says, oh, well, we can maybe do that about 2.5. What? Just because... So you've almost halved the rate just because I said you're having a laugh. And again, I come back to saying it's amazing how many people are out there. It'll just take somebody else's word for it and think there's no negotiation involved in this. Fair enough, if you've got the mortgage works and you've got Birmingham Midshires and you're going through a normal mortgage broker, that's fine. But you've got to be careful if you're dealing with your personal bank. Your personal bank is there as a business. They're there to make money. So they'll maybe not technically sell you the buy-to-let product. It will give you the best deal. They're there to get the best deal for them. That's really what it comes down to. So having a good mortgage broker on your side, somebody who's prepared and versed in buy-to-let and specialises in buy-to-let is a big, big plus. Really, that's what it comes down to. Because again, this is another wee thing that you'll save a fortune on. Because it's not about the big win in this. It's about the wee small successive wins that you get throughout the process. It is the refurb. It's a bit less. It is the purchase price you maybe bought it for, or you maybe inherited it for, or you've maybe taken it over for. It is the lower interest rate you'll get. It'll maybe give you an extra £50 a month, which is effectively £600 a year, which in 10 years' time is £6,000. Who wouldn't want another £6,000 straight in their pocket? Because it's no variable. It's like you save money on your mortgage. It doesn't. There's no other cost to that. You don't get any other costs. It goes straight to your bottom line. So that's what you want to do. But again, I come back to saying having a letting agent that actually knows that and understands that, and a broker that understands that as well, knows full well how important it is, these marginal improvements all the way through the process in order to maximise the return at the end for you. I mean, there, in point, when you think about the logic of this, if I could save somebody £50 a month on their buy-to-let mortgage, they got us to manage their property because they were managing it themselves. Effectively, it's a cash-neutral situation to them, and they're no longer managing it. And I've done that for people before. It's amazing. And the same with rent as well. It's like, we've had people before, it's like, I'm only charging £300 a month. I'm like, what? You should be charging about 400. I said, you could end up paying us 60 quid. You're 40 quid up and we're doing it for you. And I says, we're getting 400 instead of 300. I never even thought of that. And, they've been with us for years. I know the people in point that I was speaking to, but it's these chance meetings and chance conversations that you have with someone, you think to yourself, I never even knew that. A lot of people don't know what they don't know. And that is the biggest challenge in the buy-to-let market. You go through it completely blind and oblivious to the fact that you've got to comply with all these bits of legislation, plus the fact there's absolutely fantastic offers out there and fantastic interest rates and fantastic, ways of doing things in order to maximize the returns. I mean, everybody talks about 6%, and I'm like, you're crazy. I'm at 12 minimum. It's like, I want 12 minimum. I'm not going any below that. 6% is disgraceful. I should take myself out and shoot myself if that's the case. I clearly won't do that, but
no. It's interesting you bring up people's knowledge with regards to obviously rental value and things. I mean, recently this week, Kevin, quite a good example is a new landlord has never let before, and he was really clued up on the legislation side of things. He had all his smoke alarms in, he had all his certificates in hand and things, but he had no knowledge about rental value. And the property in question was, I think, what did we value, Kevin? £650, £700 a month. He was expecting something like £300, and he was totally like blown away with the rental valuation. I
would have guaranteed him £300 a month, and I would have gone and rented it for something and made the differential. And he would have had the asset, and he would have had control of it, but I would have made money for nothing.
Yeah, but so he was totally, obviously, completely oblivious to how much he could actually achieve for it. So you were going to say, Kevin?
Yeah, I was shocked by what he thought that he was going to get as opposed to what we actually said to him. Obviously, just having somebody that knows more side of the market, you can see the difference in return that you'd get. Because obviously, if he'd gone and done that himself, he would have been getting a fraction of, half of what he could have been getting for it.
Yeah, and it was a surprise to us as well, because obviously he was quite knowledgeable about the legislation side of things, which is not so common when you speak to landlords, especially landlords who are really letting property already. So that was a good surprise for him, and I think it kind of reaffirmed his faith in us as an agent, obviously, that we were advising them properly as well. So that's pretty good.
What I see as well is the fact that he could make a lot more money, but then he could do something with the property. He could actually put, if it needs a new kitchen, he could put a new kitchen in probably within a year and have a payback straight away. You know, within a year, and it was money he didn't have anyway. The tenant's happy as Larry because they've got a new kitchen, a new bathroom or whatever. I mean, I got caught out with this recently. I've had a tenant with me for about 20 odd years, and I gave them a huge discount in the beginning, and I never ever paid attention to it. And it accrued to about £20,000 at the end of the day that I could have made over and above what I did. And I'm not really bored about that. But now it's come back to haunt me because it's like, I want a new kitchen. Okay, I'll give you a new kitchen. I want a new heating system. I want new windows. I want a new bathroom now, or I'm moving out. And I'm like, where do you think that's coming from? Is there a magic money tree somewhere?
Yeah.
Because you've got away with £20,000 and extra payments you should have paid over the years. Therefore, where do you think that refurb would all come from? It would have come from the extra you would have paid me in order to do that. I've still got to pay the bank finance as well on the property because it's a buy-to-let mortgage. So, and we've still got to run it as well. So, you know, what part of that do you understand? Your rent will have to go up. Well, if I'm paying more rent, I'm wanting this. It's like, aye, but you've still got to take account that you've got away with £20,000 over the years. So I will never do that again. But for me, it was a lesson learned. And the great thing is I've always taught that as part and parcel of something that has happened to me and has benefited everybody else as a result. So you know yourself, Richard and Karen, that most of the things that have happened to me in the past and the experience I've gained out of it, whether it's been negative or has always been a positive experience at the end of the day. Because it's a learning opportunity for me, and I'm able to pass on that knowledge to everyone else, so they'll understand exactly why they need to do what they need to do, rather than actually just thinking, oh, but they're a really nice person. I would really like to charge them a lot lower, and it's like, oh, I tell you what, I'll come back to haunt you. Yeah. I mean, accidental landlord or not, don't think like that. You have to think like you've got to look after this person. If anything goes wrong, you've got to be able to reinvest in them.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And in a situation like that, I think there needs to be some negotiation and common ground where you find, like you say, obviously you were quite happy to obviously then install kitchen heating system and things, but then obviously it started to spiral to, well, we're just going to refurb and renovate the whole.
Why did I not just knock down the house and start again?
Yeah, aye. So there needs to be that kind of common ground where, like, okay, I've done this and that's enough. So, but just to skip back, obviously the topic, obviously mortgages and taxes. I think accidental landlords, of course, if you're looking at mortgage options and things, don't just stick to the bank that's already got the mortgage on the property. Speak to the professionals, obviously lenders or mortgage brokers, and obviously agents like yourselves to get the best advice and hopefully get the best rate on any buy-to-let mortgages or that you have in place. I think just to go with, like you say, Jim, your experience with the banks, it's not really the best option to just proceed with. So
there's a lot more tax deductions as well. I mean, the tax authorities are a lot more lenient now. They realise things like, well, classic example was when I first started, every house was single glazed. And there was a mass move to upgrade everybody to double glazing. And really, it was never, it was, you know, how it was is it an improvement or is it just normal revenue expenditure? My background's accountancy, so I get it completely. And they said, look, you know, it's expected practice now to actually upgrade to double glazing. So we would actually give you that as an allowable expense now, even though it's classified as an improvement. So you get instant deduction from that. There's a lot more lenient as well now because you've got the wear and tear allowance, which was taken away, and they're now actually just doing it on replacement. So everything you replace more or less is deductible now. The kitchen, as long as it's like for like, if they will allow it to be deducted straight away. The normal course of practice is if you add something on. So probably the classic example when I first started was if you had a bath and you put the shower over the bath, the installation of the shower would actually be capitalized. So that would go to the capital value. So the only way you get a deduction is when you actually sold the property, you would get a deduction against your capital gains. Whereas now they're a bit more lenient towards that and they allow it a bit more, but they've not got the manpower anymore to go and check all these things. So the reality is just be prepared for it to come back to haunt you. But they'll get you one way or the other, because if you get an instant deduction on it, when you go to sell it, you'll be a higher capital gains.
Yeah.
No, it's or vice versa. If you don't get the instant deduction, you'll pay income tax a bit more. But when you go to sell it, your capital gains will be a bit lower. So it's exactly, you know, what sort of portfolio do you want to build? But that's no about this. This is about accidental landlords.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, but obviously allowable expenses, if you're an accidental landlord, you probably won't be aware that there is allowable expenses that are tax deductible. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So yeah, moving on, obviously we have now got insurance and inventories to discuss, and most rentals are unfurnished. That's partly down to the strict rules around fire safety, as we mentioned already, on furniture, and also because tenancies are getting longer. Tenants want to be surrounded by their own belongings and feel completely at home. Yet even an unfurnished property has plenty inside that needs to be insured. Kitchen cupboards, appliances, bathroom fittings, heating systems, floor coverings, electrical sockets and switches, maybe some light fittings, curtains or blinds. So alongside your regular buildings insurance policy, you should take out landlord's contents insurance to provide you with a sufficient cover in the event of damage. An inventory is another essential component and can protect you and your tenants from unnecessary misunderstandings. The lack of one is why many landlords lose deposit disputes, which has been one of the previous topics, because they need to prove loss or neglect to make a valid claim. Preparing an inventory yourself can leave you vulnerable to dispute, as it might be seen as subjective. You're much better off instructing an experienced and independent third party to provide a comprehensive written and photographic account of your property's fittings and conditions. Now, a lot of good points in there. I think inventories are a very important thing. We can't stress enough to people, Karen, I think, when we're setting up tenancies, that although inventories are not mandatory, they really need to be in place to kind of safeguard you for that whole process at the end, if in the event you need to be making a claim. And they do accept landlords doing their own inventories, but as it says there, you do run a risk doing that. I mean, if you're not using the correct terminology or photographing things correctly, it's not going to be worth the paper it's written on. So they're things that obviously you need to take into consideration. And I think landlord's insurance, of course, is a very important factor. Obviously, you need to have that in place, or you leave yourself wide open to.
It's essential. Look at the
that
case.
is essential, of course, yeah.
Look at the case in point that I've got just now. I've had a property which is empty since 2018. And they're about to make out an interim payment from a rent I've lost of £20,000.
Yeah.
And then the damage that's been caused over the years because someone upstairs won't fix the roof and lets it flood into mine. They're actually going to have to outlay about £30,000 to sort that as well. And then they're actually going to have to take legal action against them as well. But I had the right policy. It perfectly covered me. And this will be a surprise to everyone. I have no contents insurance because the policy I have automatically covers you for £5,000 worth of contents insurance. And it also covers you for damage to your kitchens, your fixtures, your flooring, your carpets, your garden. If your garden gets damaged because the fire brigade have to trample all over it to get in, to break a window, to get their water in, or anything like that, that policy covers you. And I don't have any contents insurance at all because it's all standard practice. And yet that policy I bought was £120.
Yeah.
£60,000 later, and I bought it for 120 grand. How brilliant is that? Is having the right insurer is key in that scenario, because you're protected. Now let's look at that with someone else who instantly, maybe about 5, 6, 7 years ago, when they had the really bad winter, upstairs was flooded, and it kept pouring in because their washing machine pipe had burst, and it was £25,000 worth of damage. Yeah. And at the time when I met that landlord, I insisted to them, you need to have the right policy. It's the policy that I've got today that I've just talked about.
Yeah.
And they said, no. I've had my brokers for years. I trust them. They'll do everything for me. They'll tell me, I trust them what to do. I went, are you sure? Because some policies won't cover you just in case, because he does deal with the DSS housing benefit market, the universal credit. And I says, are you sure that covers? Yes, it does cover me. My broker says £25,000 worth, and he wasn't covered. Loss adjuster walked in the door. I thought nothing of it because it says, what's the circumstance of the tenant? I went, well, they're on benefits. They get their money paid to us direct and all the rest of it. Oh, I don't think they're covered for that. It took him 2 years of legal battles, having to pay for a solicitor to battle it out to get £25,000. Now compare that. He probably paid double the amount of money, by the way, for his insurance policy than I paid for mine. Now, there's the comparison there straight away. I'm still getting paid regardless, and it's still covered, and somebody's still doing something for me. And this one, he had to fight to get £25,000 worth and actually pay a solicitor to do it. That is the most important thing about getting the right insurers to do it. Direct line is not the policy you should be using. That's they're double the price. They don't cover most of the criteria that specific landlord insurance policies cover. So, you know, but people trust them because it's a big name. That's really what it comes down to. But they don't understand. So again, it comes back to experience of existing landlords and letting agents to understand that process for insurance. Yeah,
people do put their trust in the bigger companies because they're very large businesses. They're quite obviously widely advertised, and people just assume that, well, surely they're going to give me the proper cover. I know that case you were referring to about obviously the guy who didn't have the correct cover in place for covering the universal credit tenant. I do use that as an example quite often when speaking to tenants, because landlords, because obviously if they're tenants on benefits, does your policy cover that? And really reinforce that any insurance policy you're considering putting in place, you really need to read what you're actually covered for and look at the finer detail.
It's amazing as well the amount of landlords that you go around to actually meet for the first time, or even accidental landlords have inherited the property and they've got to rent it, and then you mention to them about, you know, let's take it you've got your landlord insurance in place because they've got the tenant in situ, and you're like, they're like, oh right, okay, so which policy did you use? No, I just kept a normal house insurance. What?
Which doesn't cover you for liability.
The house burns down, they've got no liability because you've put somebody else in there which has complete control of it. Even when I rented to the local authority under private sector leasing, where the local authority took flats and properties off of me and looked after them, I couldn't use my existing landlord's policy because it didn't cover you for the fact that it was the council, it was in control of the tenant, it went in. So I had to get a separate policy by an underwriter, which actually covered that type of tenancy agreement, because I was effectively leasing to the council. They were my tenant, and the tenant they were putting in was the tenant of the council, which I had no control over. So my normal policy I talked about there now did not apply. So it's coming back to saying it's amazing the amount of people you walk in the door and they say, oh, well, I'm covered. And it's like, I've just let the normal house insurance run. And I'm like, you're not covered at all. You better get that changed quick, because if anything happens to this, you're thousands and they'll just walk away.
Yeah, it's a very important aspect of letting. And Karen, you'll know yourself, obviously, it's one of the things that we obviously check with every landlord that's coming on, that they have the insurance policy in place, along with everything else that goes hand in hand.
That's probably where it comes back to the inventories as well. I mean, you're right about the inventories, because if you've got an inventory in place, then you've got a full belts and braces assessment of the property if anything happens. You know, especially for your insurance, and also for, you know, yourself, the deposit resolution system, because they'll only ever believe somebody that's independent now. They'll very rarely believe the existing landlord. So you're on a wing and a prayer.
Yeah, I think it is important to have the inventory done by ideally by a third party inventory clerk, and not even the agent, because obviously I think it's better to have that third party involved.
Yeah.
So, and then that brings us on to staying within the law. Now, depending on your mindset, landlord legislation is either a fascinating or forever changing landscape that thrills at every turn, or a minefield of obstacles and paperwork that sends you running for the hills.
Both.
And I think that's the difference. Some landlords could feel overwhelmed, and I think letting agents and things like that do it as a job. And I think sometimes there's a certain degree of satisfaction when you know that you followed everything correctly, everything's checked off, everything's in place. Do you know what I mean? It's like, right, okay, that's all done right. And obviously that's part of what we do. I mean, it's a big part of what we do. So there is a bit of gratification in that, and I think maybe we find it a lot more satisfying than what a normal landlord would. They maybe see it as an obstacle and things that are in their way. So whatever your view, it's your responsibility as a landlord to ensure that your properties comply with all current regulations around gas, electrical, fire safety, as well as habitation. It's a non-negotiable requirement, and ignorance is no defence. Fines can be heavy, so don't leave anything to chance. If you intend to be a self-managing landlord, the best way to stay fully informed about your responsibilities is either through online landlord forums or be regularly checking the government's website for updates to the law. When you use a managing agent, you're effectively shifting the accountability of knowing the law to them, an attractive option when legislation isn't your favourite read. And that's just obviously reinforcing what we're discussing, what we always reiterate is that we do it daily, and that is our job. And if you're not prepared to be so hands-on and knowledgeable about the legislation and compliance of things, you could end up being in hot water. I think if you're a landlord and things go wrong and you've not met the compliance or legislation on the property. Agree with that, Karen? Obviously.
Yep, obviously, as we touched on, there's a lot of safety requirements along with the property, so you're having to make sure that you're not only doing them but doing them well. So like you say, you have to be like knowledgeable on what you have to be doing, what standard you have to be doing them up to, which can be quite overwhelming. So
yeah, it's funny, some landlords we speak to that obviously maybe are accidental or just new landlords in general, and their perspective on what are like all the and they think that they've done enough. And they come to us and say, that's all in place, it's all done. And we have a look at things and think, no, but you still have to do this, you still have to do this. Yeah, it could be quite a surprise to them because they think they've got it all in hand and they don't. And it just shows how people could be unknowingly ignorant to what the requirements they need to be meeting are. And without the knowledge or advice for someone who's got the experience, then they've left themselves wide open.
Well, look at the classic example you get of I've inherited a property and all my friends living in it.
Yeah,
okay, so where's the lease? Oh well, it's just my friend, isn't it? It's like I've gotten it. That's the way it is, right? Okay, so immediately the Scottish legislation falls into place. And they've instantly got rights under that legislation, which are more draconian than actually having the lease itself. Yeah. So did you give them the park when they moved in? Did you show them the EPC? Did you show them what gas certificate? What electricity certificate? It's like, that's an accidental landlord.
Yeah,
that's a typical example. It's like, so you've done nothing to them, and I could see that you've probably done nothing to them because I'm walking around and I'm saying that none of you've got nothing to smoke to. Oh, I've got one in the fire brigade put it up.
That's a funny one, yeah.
It's a classic, eh? The fire brigade put it up, and yeah, the fire brigade's doing a wonderful job of putting battery-powered smoke alarms in, but they don't know your property is rented. They're just going on as a normal house owner and going, well, we'll put one up for you because we've been given them as a freebie by Scottish Power to go around and give out to people, just to create more awareness of smoke detectors and be safe in your home. And it's gobsmacking sometimes, you know. I can't understand, but let's come back to the staying within the law. We're staying within the law, but is the law actually doing anything about it? No, they're not. They're not policing it at all. So the very people set up to actually put all this legislation in place and say, you must do this, you must do that, you must comply with this, and they haul you over the coals for doing anything out of that, then actually don't police it. They don't actually make sure that everything's in place. They don't check anybody. There's a classic example. When did somebody check that last letting agent I had in Cooper that I bought these properties from? Probably never.
Yeah.
And yet, so who's checking them? And the trading standards, landlord registration, they're all meant to be checking. But if the trading standards can't even look after the kebab shops and police them, how the hell are they going to police blooming landlords? Because there's about 20,000 throughout Fife. And there's more tenures as well. Yeah. So where does that leave us? So it's a great talking point for everybody to have the landlord, the private landlords, we're the proverbial whipping boy or whatever it is. And we're always the one that everybody wants to have a go at. But the reality is we're actually following the legislation, and the people that are actually putting the legislation in place are needing actually properly monitoring it.
Yeah,
I definitely need a soapbox.
That's a good point you make.
Maybe that could be my retirement present. Maybe you could just buy me a soapbox and soapbox. That'll take a lot of years.
You planning on retiring?
No. Well, I'm retired now, but because I could sit on a beach and still earn money for the rest of my life. But the reality is, I love doing what I'm doing. I mean, sadly, I am of the mindset that the legislation just floats my boat completely. But also arguing the principle with the authorities about the interpretation of the legislation and how it should be applied and when it should be applied is great. I love it. You know, because it's a legal aspect, and then often they'll turn around and say, "Oh, you're absolutely right. We've just checked." You know, so I get that all the time. You know, where the people that are supposed to be in power actually are saying, "Oh, there's got to be this, there's got to be that, it's got to be this," and then I challenge them and say, "Well, where is that in the legislation?" It's like, "Oh, well, it's not really. It's actually just it's hearsay and speculation being passed on by other people who they thought were in authority, and then they're just spouting out as well." So, you know, for politicians, get your facts right before you open your mouth and let your belly rumble.
I think as well, you can have, even if you do know what you're doing with regards to the legislation, like we've had a landlord that last week alone that I've been speaking to, and she was able to provide me with all the property safety certificates. Like, she knew what she was doing on that aspect, but she'd come to us because she was like, I'm too overwhelmed with trying to get everything sorted out for a new tenant. She was like, I've got these people, but I don't know. So we've done the referencing for them, set up all their paperwork, did all the ins and outs for it, and obviously just took that stress off of her for it. But one of the key things that she said to me was, property is like my baby. No, it's such a, honestly, I totally understand it when people get into that situation, because it's a property that they've lived in, they had the emotional attachment to it, but it makes it harder for you because then you're seeing it as somebody else making a home in it. They'll pick up on things that perhaps that they've not picked up on when they've been living in it, and it can kind of get your back up a wee bit if people are picking up faults with property that's been your baby. So it's easier to have an agent that's this impartial person that's going to deal with the property in an aspect of, this is what needs to be done, as opposed to the emotional side of it as well. So obviously we were able to take that stress off of her for it. So you are going to get landlords that might be clued up with regards to legislation, but it will be such an overwhelming process, just even trying to find yourself the right tenant for it. And just now we're in a day where legislation is so in favour of the tenants that you can't afford really to be for it. So you have to make sure you're doing, like, following the right procedure, even with referencing, just to make sure you're setting it up like a good stance at the start point for your tenancy.
Well, it's just to finish off a bit here. It's like it's going to hit the fan when we're coming out of COVID, and evictions have just been announced that we're allowed to go ahead with them now. And but are we actually going to go back to the standard normality we had before in terms of legislation for private rented landlords? I don't think so. I think the government are going to take this as a golden opportunity to leave some of the things in place.
I think they're going to use that as an opportunity to, I think.
Oh well, you survived with it without it. That's why I went hell for leather at Jenny Gilruth and Kevin Stewart, because I thought you're going to get to the end of this and think everything went swimmingly well, and no realising that the plight of private landlords and the amount of money that they're losing and the stress and the mental health that they're suffering as a result because their hands are tied. And so I need to tell you now. So I've been going at them hammer and tongue all this time, in the background, making sure they're completely aware of this. So it's no surprise that I'll pop my head above the parapet and start arguing if they say we should leave things in place.
Yeah, definitely agree. And I think, just to round off, obviously becoming an accidental landlord can provide you with an income producing asset for many years and into retirement. But preparing your home correctly, staying on top of maintenance, attending swiftly to repairs, and keeping abreast of legislation, you'll lay the groundwork for a run of successful tenancies. And final thoughts for me here, I think, is to, obviously, if you become a landlord by accident, make sure you seek the right advice through, obviously, experienced letting agencies like yourselves, and also seek advice from mortgage brokers to get your best deal on your mortgage and things as well. You need to seek the right advice. Jim, final thoughts?
Have a chat with us first, please.
Yeah.
And then if you decide to do it yourself, then fair enough, great stuff. That's what you really want to do. But I tell you what, you need to be aware of the complete process that you have to get involved in. It's a minefield. And I tell you what, you'll wish you'd never done it. And you just passed on to someone. The price of a cup of coffee every single day, remember that. That's what you're going through to be an accidental landlord if you're not getting a letting agent to do it.
Yeah. And I think that's a good note to end on today. So thanks for joining us, Jim. A lot of good points there. And thanks, Karen, as always. Very informative. And
surprised you put up with me.
Well, I'm used to it now, Jim. It's fine. Right, guys. Well, I'll let you go and enjoy your day. And
No bother.
okay.
See you later, guys. Have a nice day.
Bye.